I think the capacity, absorption capacity of this one is declining because of frequent droughts and other natural calamities. So therefore, certainly the microfinance is not a substitute for this one, our institutional finance. And we should see that institutional finance, especially interest rates are very reasonable, and it has to reach the small holders. And I am not against this microfinance. Microfinance only it should not lead to exploitation. You must be knowing that in Andhra Pradesh, why the court say interfered and stopped this microfinance in Andhra Pradesh state. So this is very sensitive. That is why. Yes. So I want your reactions on this.
Thanks. I just wanted to carry this conversation on scaling up. It seems to me that we might want to think more about the institutional context and this links with scaling up. So obviously we all talk about scaling up being important. What form does it take requires perhaps much more discussion. So for instance, in relation to say farmer cooperation was also raising yesterday. If we're simply talking about marketing, then you could have and a membership-based marketing organization, you can actually have millions. So if you talk about Amul Dairy, you have 2.5 million and more individual, very small producers being a member. But if you go further down and you're saying, let's talk about crop planning, then your scale would be perhaps an ecological zone or even smaller, so there are clusters that we might talk about. But if you're really talking about farmer cooperation in land pooling, we're talking about quite small groups, 10 to 15 farmers. Now, all these are forms. How do we scale up that lowest level? And here, the way in which SNGs have scaled up, for instance, is a good model, which is that you have horizontal and vertical linkages and federations. The actual cooperation is with very small groups, but nevertheless it's scaled up because you have representation horizontal and vertical for other functions. For instance, you might want to bargain with markets and with the state. So I think these are all potential aspects of scaling up and thinking through. And here also the notion of nested communities that Ellen Ostrom brought in quite effectively is very important to think about, because for small groups to scale up, that would be the model, and that would also be the model I was thinking about with very small farmer associations, but nevertheless linked to larger structures.
Take two more.
This is a point for Mrs. Singh. The issue of interest rate, exactly the issue of interest rate. The Prime Minister, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, all of them have seriously indicated their reservation about microfinance. Why they have intervened on that is because of the fact that the corporates have cornered that money and are diverting those funds for microfinance primarily to meet their own ends, rather, and that being the issue of market-directed microfinance rather than the producer required microfinance really.
Question to Rodney Cook. Excellent presentation, of course, contradictory, thoughtful, provocative, and which is obvious as a complex issue. But as you mentioned, also it is stated in your abstract, is rain-fed agriculture, smallholder farmers, and poverty all are interlinked. So should we not look for rain-fed independent agriculture, or climate resilient crop development so that we can make these people free of this dependence on them. Thank you.
I'm going to take just two more in this round and I'll come back.
Thank you. Superb presentations, both of them. Thank you very much. I have questions, but rather than I'm going to ask them later, I'm going to reflect on something that was kind of inspired by what Rodney said. I would like to inject a note of caution when it comes to our infatuation with the Millennium Development Goals and poverty reduction. Because we should recognize that the big picture force of rural poverty reduction is economic growth. With it come off-farm employment opportunities and a lifting of rural wages, and we got to recognize that that's the big picture force, and none of us, whether it be ICRISAT, the CG, IFAD, the Syngenta Foundation, or the Gates Foundation, can do anything about it. The second main force of rural poverty reduction is another area, another tidal wave that we cannot do anything about, and that is governmentally sponsored rural development through rural investment out of China, or according to the OECD model, with lots of subsidies. We can have obviously a discussion about whether that is good or bad, but that is what has reduced poverty in the likes of China and the OECD. And again, we cannot do anything about it now. Only at the third level can we begin to do something about it. And there, of course, that's where our discussion is situated, and that's where we have to have our, reflection about the methodologies and so on, in order to be doing that work as best as we can. That is where technology comes in. It's where IMOD comes in. It's where all of these discussions with respect to scaling up, with respect to methods, with respect to setting examples from which we can learn, come in. But at this stage too, the poverty rhetoric doesn't help us. What we need is, I apologize for using my terms yesterday, technology, services, and access to markets. In other words, the farmers don't want charity, they want skills, they want markets, they want crop insurance, they want credit, and so on. And market access is really central to any approach or any strategy to reducing rural poverty. And so in this context, I have a question for our Indian colleagues. We seem to be going for FDI in retail, as per the announcements in over the last 10 days or something like this. So it's good to see Walmart and Tesco and Carrefour and so on coming in. But why can we not allow them to come in with a condition that would say something like 60% of your sourcing has to come from farmers that operate individually less than 1.5 hectares. And it is with that kind of policy condition that the work that IMOD attempts to do would be framed in a big way, in a way that would allow scaling up almost automatically because of the market pull of these large operators.
I'll just take the last one.
My comment was about scale up, and I mean, we've increased about the focus on scale up. We must remember scale up must be demand driven. You can't scale up, there's no demand. And so I think a lot of our development is, I think the whole idea of generating technology and all the activities we're doing is to plant the supply chain, which I call the value chain, to ensure that if the malting company or so and so demand a lot of sorghum, you can supply food and help all the smallholder farmer, the large scale farmer, whosoever produce. But the scale up is going to be a pull from the demand. And the credit, if a private sector can see the opportunity, I would say to really show there's an opportunity in the system, whether it's from small scale, the opportunity now becomes visible to the private sector. Then they go to the market alone and really provide the scale, whether it's a seed company, whether it's a malting company, whether it's a juice company, whether it's the animal feed companies and so on. But we must remember, scale-up must be demand-driven. You can't scale up if there is no demand, and there is no value-adding, processing, marketing, and so on. So I think that is the point I felt need to be linked to the scale-up, not through intention. It can't be supply-driven. There has to be demand-driven. And there's market opportunities, there has to be entrepreneurship, there has to be developing of new products, and there has to be a pull and a push.
There are questions pertaining to microfinance, which will relate to interest rates, the state of financing, and whether or not it would be feasible and advisable for us to substitute institutional financing by microfinance. Now, if you come to this issue of interest rates, I think it's pretty commonsensical. The interest rates basically are determined by your cost of funds and then, of course, your operational costs, or what you term and call transaction costs. And then, of course, you have your marginal profit. Now, the determination of these interest rates by the microfinance institutions as they were operating, and I take the most visible case of Andhra, where in the old system, the business was of the order of 35,000 crores. Let us not delude ourselves that this was small trade. This was really big trade. And the reason why there needed to be a clampdown was that there was a great clash of interest because the rates being charged was somewhere within the region of 24 to 32%, as high as that. Now, when this business was just about growing, with the historical background, I'd like to inform you that whenever some conscious people, socially conscious people were raising issues that while this is a great facility complementing the institutional finance network in the country, these are very, very high rates. And the banks would come back, companies would come back and say, well, what can we do? That's the cost of finance, and our operational costs are high because the infrastructure is hardly available in many of these areas, and it really takes a while before we can provide the outreach. So this is the way we have determined the rates of interest. Now, before time, I think the lid blew off, and everybody knows the fairly heavy hand. First, it was the state government of Andhra Pradesh, and then, of course, the Reserve Bank of India itself got into the act. And you all know that it is now sub judice, where concurrent legislations are being disputed as for whether on the banking segment of the Indian economy is it the turf of the RBI or is it the turf of the Andhra Pradesh government. So it is really for the courts to settle whose turf it is. But in the meanwhile, the Reserve Bank has gone ahead and said that what we do grant you is a 10% margin in case your business exceeds 100 crores. For the smaller ones, smaller players below 100 crores, 12% margin is okay. And the way they have determined this margin is your cost of borrowing and your cost of lending. So the difference that they have calculated is 10% for the big fish and 12% for the smaller lenders who go out and do the outreach. I mean, the jury is still out, and I would say that it is nobody's case that microfinance should and would substitute regular institutional financing. The case being made out is that these should run complementary. I mean, you have just heard the number of farmers, they are rapidly on increase because of the size of the holdings getting divided, subdivided. So how do you provide coverage to so many millions and millions and millions? And it is not to be left to the institutional finance banking system only to be doing this. The private sector and I am on the boards of one of the most vibrant ones, that's the Yes Bank. We have been debating this issue, but they are very cautious. They are very cautious as to how far they wish to go and how deep they wish to go into rural areas, unless a lot of these issues regarding interest rates, etc., can be settled. Because no bank would like to bleed public-private. I mean, that is not the ethos, you see. So that's the way the whole sector has played out. And we are very hopeful that soon after the submission of the Maligram Committee report, they have been very transparent and brought out the issues. There is a large amount of consensus within the banking community, public-private, that they need to settle this and get back into business sooner than later. Have I answered the issues that you raised? Is there anything, Sukanshi, which you would like to know beyond what you have replied? We talk about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, a couple of questions on scaling up. Bina rightly says institutional context is fundamental. And indeed, that's what's behind those analyses of drivers and spaces. Who are the partners? How does it work? You also mentioned self-help groups. Well, please remember when I'm talking about country programs, these are development programs, it's not research programs. We're looking at what we can scale up to reach a larger group of people through the appropriate partnerships. ICRISAT, of course, was involved with self-help groups in the early days. The comment from Florence von Bulbul, of course, must be demand-driven. Remember the scalability checklist. That is all about, is it demand-driven? How relevant is it to the people involved? How observable is it, testable is the ease of adoption, something they want. Otherwise, we're wasting time. You're right, absolutely right on those points, so strongly support that. Then to Swabandata, ICAR, concerned about vulnerability of rain-fed systems. Aren't we all? This is the problem. This is why all those discussions on sustainable ag intensification, what does it mean, especially aggravated by climate adaptation needs, the climate smart agriculture, how do we reduce the vulnerabilities? Of course, rain-fed agriculture, to reduce the risk completely, I think you were hinting at one of my other slides on water management. Huge challenges, and that's why I'm going to discuss some of those issues with you next week. Marco, you say you opened up talking about MDG infatuation. I don't know who's infatuated. Most of the member states signed up to the MDGs, and many of them are trying very hard to forget. So they're certainly not infatuated. Also, then I think just legally said that the poverty vocabulary was not relevant. Well, I never said that. Remember, whether I'm speaking for CTA or IFAD or myself, all the tenets about agribusiness development, let me put it another way. One of the big challenges is that commercialization of agriculture is not restricted to large farms. That it can apply to agriculture on all scales with appropriate group formation, with appropriate empowerment, with appropriate organization. That's the challenge with pro-poor value chains. So I agree with everything you said, so I find it difficult to disagree with that. We discussed before the economic incentives and marketing. You asked, your question was actually, I think you said to partners here in India, but I'll just make one comment on that, this issue of if we have companies purchasing that there should be quotas for smallholder farms. This, of course, the model that Brazil used for their purchases of bioenergy. They insisted that there was a percentage from smallholder farms, and it seems to work very well for Brazil. It's for the Indian policymakers to decide whether they wish to follow that route in the light of recent developments. I think that's the shortest answers I can give.
Thank you, colleagues. We're eating into tea, so I'll just take two very burning ones. Frank had that hand. Is there anybody else? I'll take the gentleman in the blue in the middle after that.
Well, I have a few comments on various things we heard, and I'll start off with a comment to Rodney that you are a dangerous man. You keep on quoting everything I say, and other people say it's very dangerous to me. But the point well taken. I think I want to go on to the topic of scale up because that came up yesterday and again today. So from our perspective, I really did not want to discount that aspect of scaling into hundreds of thousands because we have lots of lessons we learn all the time. And I'm particularly that we should be context specific also. That is not easy for the scale that we are looking at. Because unless we start looking at a much bigger picture, I don't think we'll ever get to that level of millions to reaching billions before we reach the billion. So I think we are really trying to experiment with models, and that is one of the reasons why we're insisting on scaling up to larger levels. I know it's not going to be easy, but the concept of on small self-help groups and accreditation, which Pradhan is working on, right now I'm in the process of discussion with lots of people here to see how we can scale it up. But this government of India has an NRL mission, the National Rural Livelihood Mission, which we have been in discussion with them also to see if that can adapt some of the Pradhan models or other models. It's not easy. First of all, forming a partnership with government of India itself would be a challenge, and then implementing and executing at each state levels could be a huge challenge, given all the situation here. So we will try that. That is something we can experiment. Some of the larger organizations will have to team up with that. And that's again how you communicate information. And that's what we think of technology, like digital technologies that we use to promote things. I think at the base of all these things, what I want to touch upon is what Florence commented and you said. What I believe in, or we believe in, we should be able to give the farmer options. She should have the option to choose. As R&D folks, our goal should be to provide the farmer as many options as possible that fits the context. Then the demand will come. I fully agree we have that demand, but when you give them options, demand will come. iPod, example for scale of iPod, it just spread like wildfire. When there is a good product, there will be demand. I think that's the thing I think will eventually happen too. And as I really believe, if we have good products, that's why R&D comes in. That's why we invest in R&D, and that's why we have to evolve. The last point on what Marcus said in terms of